Please join me in giving Dave Trabert a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy the invitation. I wish I live in the Overland Park area. I run the office we have up there now, and I wish there was a Pachyderm Club that even came close to this. There's really nothing like this in Johnson County, and hopefully this club will serve as a model someday to get us one of these Pachyderm clubs in Johnson County. I want to give you a quick recap of some of the issues, some of the major issues that are going on in the legislature right now and what's happened so far. But I want to also spend most of the time on the school funding issue, because that's what's frankly has taken up most of the oxygen in the legislature this year and will continue to. Not just because of not just the school funding part, but because school funding really drives pretty much everything that happens in the budget. School funding drives the tax policy in Kansas and in most states. So that's where I want to spend most of the time. We have some handouts on your table, and I'll refer to a few of those once in a while. Let's start by talking about the budget. Now, the House and Senate budgets have been passed. They only work with significant tax increases. The revenue piece hasn't been passed yet. But we're continuing to set spending records in Kansas. And that's one of the problems that we see is that there's a basic math imbalance. You cannot have a conservative tax plan and a liberal spending plan. It just doesn't work that way. But that's what drives the desire of legislators for the most part. Now, not everyone certainly, but there's an awful lot of legislators who just don't want to say no to the special interests. I mean, the key to having a low tax burden is to keep spending down. It's not cutting services, it's reducing the cost of the service. You've probably heard me say, but it bears repeating, the states that have an income tax in 2012 spent 49% more per resident than the states that don't have an income tax. 49%. Now, can anyone name a state that doesn't have public education, highways, social service programs, and everything else? Of course not. The states that have low taxes do so because they provide their services at a better price and pass the savings on. Now, in 2012, while all the states that have an income tax spent 49% more, Kansas was right up there with them. We spent 37% more per resident. And that was $300 million ago. 2015 spending is going to be about $300 million more per year than in 2012. Now, we have the ability to bring down. The key to balancing the budget is to provide the services at a better price. It's that political self-interest that gets in the way, because what happens when you bring down the cost is that there's fewer spoils to divide among those who profit from excess government spending. And when there's fewer spoils to divide, there's less power for those doing the dividing. That gets to the heart of it. While the budgets have been passed, I don't think we're going to really have this resolved until the closing days of the session sometime in May. The revenue piece hasn't been done, and we still don't know what the new revenue estimates will look like when they come out mid-April. So don't be discouraged by the fact that we've got budgets passed so far that spend more money. There's still opportunity to reduce that, and I know that there's a number of legislators who want to bring down the cost of government. There was, you probably saw an article in the paper today that there was a big hearing the last 2 days on Medicaid expansion. We don't think that that's going to go anywhere. There's a lot of false promises and false claims made behind that. I don't think anyone would disagree with the claim that we need to do something about health care. We do need to make it more affordable and more accessible, but expanding a failed program is not the way to do that. One of the legislators pointed out that Kansas still has the same number of uninsured people. But he didn't point out that part of that's because a lot of the people who are uninsured are working people. They just can't afford insurance. Now, what's happened to the cost of insurance since Obamacare came in? Kansas has some of the highest increases in the nation. So we have a program that's raising the cost of insurance, and so what we want to do is let's have more of that program? I don't think so. If you look at the costs, and that has to be a factor, our estimate that we did a few years ago done by a scholar who's a sitting member of the Social Security Advisory Board said that just the expansion piece would cost out of the state budget $625 million over 10 years. But that's the small piece, because the federal government is supposed to be paying 90% of the cost. Well, there's no such thing as free money. Legislators like to think that, well, this is federal money, it's all free, we're entitled to it. Does the federal government have any money? First of all, it's your money, what they did have. But let's be honest, they're borrowing money. We're running deficits every year. We have an enormous debt. So here's the cost. In addition to the $625 million, one of our scholars calculated, with the assistance of Dr. Gokhale, what it would cost to the federal deficit and the debt to expand Medicaid. That's $12.4 billion over the first 10 years, because that 90% federal piece is all borrowed money. $12.4 billion makes that $625 million seem cheap. Now, $625 million is based on the feds keeping their promise of paying 90% of the cost of expansion. We were part of a conference call yesterday with Congressman Paul Ryan. The first thing out of the congressman's mouth was that 90% rate is going away at the first possible opportunity. I mean, even President Obama has been talking about going to a blended rate. They all know that this 90% rate is unsustainable. You have a broke government that's depending upon the generosity of others buying our debt, cannot continue to pay these exorbitant costs. So as soon as possible, now it might not happen with the president we have, but as soon as possible, Congress is looking at the low-hanging fruit and cutting that 90% rate down to it's called the FMAP rate, it's the federal matching rate, which right now is about 56%. So instead of Kansas paying 10, where the feds pay 90 and Kansas pays 10, Kansas in that case would pay 44%. So take your $625 million number and multiply that times 4. That's what it would cost Kansas, $2.4 billion over 10 years, if we expanded Medicaid and had to pay what we're currently paying for everyone else. It's only a matter of time before that comes. The other thing is that if we want to put people on, and we certainly do want to have people have better health outcomes, there's a study out of Oregon that shows that people who were on Medicaid didn't have better health outcomes than people who were not on Medicaid, people who had no insurance. Their outcomes were not any different, nothing noticeable. So this is not something that necessarily improves things for people, but there are things that can be done. Of course, there are things that our legislature doesn't want to do, like changing how the group health rates are done. Kansas Policy Instistute, just a couple of years ago, for example, because we only have 7 employees, we weren't able until a couple of years ago to afford health insurance. Part of that reason is we don't qualify as a group. We have to be individually rated. So our premiums are much higher than somebody getting the exact same coverage working for an employer. So if you change some of those group rules, then it changes. And also if you allow individuals the same tax treatment as employers, where employer gets to deduct the cost of the health insurance, the individual doesn't. And what that means is it's more expensive for us as individuals to buy our health care. So we're kind of trapped, held hostage to our employer health care plan, which means the insurance companies only have to deal with the HR person. You keep that person satisfied, and it doesn't really matter what the real customers think. Empower the individuals to have the same health care. Allow portability. We can buy homeowners insurance across state lines. We can buy car insurance across state lines. We ought to be able to buy health care insurance across state lines. And if we move, our health care should go with us. So there's a lot of things that we can do at the state level to make health care more affordable and more accessible. But certainly expanding Medicaid is not going to help anything. I want to spend a couple of minutes on collective bargaining. There have been a number of bills passed already that's by the House or the Senate, and in some cases just out of the committees. But I think it's safe to say at this point, when the session's over, we're going to see collective bargaining reform. It's a matter of how much we're going to see. There's one on school districts that the Senate this week changed what the House approved to put it into their own bill. And so what they've been looking at is going from 31 mandatory subjects of bargaining down to a maximum of 7. So it's not as far as we'd like to see it, and based on giving the school districts the most flexibility to make student-focused decisions, but 7 mandatory subjects is a heck of a lot better than 31. There's the Senate Commerce Committee passed a bill yesterday that would prohibit the withholding of any union dues. Actually, there was a poison pill amendment made to it that said you can't deduct anything from any employee's paycheck. Now, so that's where you're probably hearing the United Way and other charities come out of the woodwork saying, wait a minute, this is going to have a detrimental effect on us. The point of the bill was to say we're not going to withhold any organizational dues for anybody from government employees' paychecks. And so there was a senator that expanded it to all deductions. I think you'll probably see that go away because the intent, the focus was not on preventing charitable deductions, but preventing organizational dues from being withheld. There was also part of that measure would do away with the Public Employee Relations Board and allow, instead of having arbitration, it would have the Department of Labor that would be responsible for making some decisions where there's disputes, and it would it would limit to, for state employees, there'd be no more grievances, and there would be bargaining only over pay. For cities and counties, they could bargain over pay and benefits. Again, these are tremendous. It's not quite what Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, but it's certainly moving very much in that direction. Transparency. There's been a number of transparency issues discussed. A few have made some good progress. One is still being heard. The one that's still being heard, it's going to be heard on, we just got a word today, it's going to be heard on Monday. It has passed the Senate already. It's going to be heard in House Education. It's Senate Bill 188. The primary thing that bill does is put teeth into it so that school districts are actually penalized if they don't follow the law. Now, we shouldn't have to penalize government for not following the law because government should follow the law. The reality is we did the analysis that found we did a random sampling of, I think it was 27 school districts, because by law they're supposed to put a one-page budget summary on their homepage that lays out exactly what they're spending, and it's supposed to be there with an easily identifiable link. It's not hide and seek. You should be able to go to the homepage. Here's the report. I want to see it. We looked at 27 districts, and we found 2 that were actually in compliance with the law. And then, interestingly, when we went to give the testimony, the morning we gave it, I had to amend it because one of those 2 had actually pulled it down. The Kansas City district, remember the hubbub about the $47,000 piano? They retaliated by taking their spending report off their website. So the only thing left was a link to an advocacy group. It's called Game On for Kansas Schools. And this group, this is a C4. These people advocate for the elimination of legislators who don't vote for more school funding. That's what they put out as their school finance. Now, After that hearing, a few phone calls were made and they put it back up. So technically today there are still those two districts that are in compliance. The Senate passed that. The House is having a little issue with it because there's legislators who say, do we really want to fine school districts for not following state law? Well, we shouldn't want to, but we have to, unfortunately, because they won't. There's another one. Part of that would increase disclosure requirements. You've heard things like, for example, class overcrowding. One of the things we want to point out on there is what the pupil-teacher ratio is, because it's true that we have larger and larger class sizes, but what you don't know is that it's also true that the student-teacher ratio has been coming down. Statewide, it's 15.4 students for every classroom teacher. Now, what that says is when you're hiring more teachers at a faster rate than you're having students and you're bringing down the ratio and you also have increasing class sizes, you have a management problem. You don't have a funding problem. And so that's why they want to put that out there, and also some of the salary and full pay packages for the top 10 people in every school district. So there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of pushback. We don't want to put that out there, but hopefully we'll get that through. One bill that did pass the Senate, and I think will probably pass the House, requires a prospectus on every degree program at every Kansas university. So that when a student goes into whether it's a history degree, accounting degree, or whatever, you'll have some basic information. How long does it take the average graduate of this program to complete the course? It's not a 4-year in most cases. It might be 4.5, it might be 5, it might be 5.5. So what's that going to cost you in room, board, tuition, books, and everything else based on this number of years? And if you finance it, what will that cost you as a percentage of your income? Because it will also require that you show what your potential earnings are with this particular degree. So it's just a kind of a truth in advertising, and that did pass the Senate. I don't think that one's gotten to the House. And there's also another lobbying bill that looks like it's going to pass, which requires every government agency and entity to publicly disclose what it's spending on lobbying. How much taxpayer money is being used to lobby for more taxpayer money. Whether it's direct, like a school district that has a lobbyist on staff, or they've hired someone to lobby for them, a contractor, or dues paid to an organization that lobbies on your behalf, like a League of Municipalities or the Counties Association or the School Board Association, things of that nature. So that's kind of a quick rundown on some of the major issues that are going on in Kansas right now in the legislature. And now I'd like to turn to the block grant and school funding. First of all, let's talk about why there's a need for a block grant. Because what the block grant does is provide a temporary funding grant to schools based on what they're supposed to get this year, which is an increase, and I'll get to that in a minute. So it block grants money to schools for a 2-year period while a new school funding formula is being developed. And that's the reason for the block grant, because we need a new school funding formula. I think on your one of your handouts there is a column we had in the Wichita Eagle that explains some of the rationale why we believe the current school funding formula is irreparably broken. And we've been talking about this for several years, but here's just a few examples. The purpose of education funding is to educate students, but that's not really what the outcomes show. And it's not how the school funding formula was designed. It's designed to fund institutions. You can't, even special money that's targeted for at-risk and bilingual, you can't show that it gets to those students, because in many cases it really doesn't. The money goes to the districts. We fund institutions. So sure, the formula works from the institution standpoint, because it's provided not even hundreds of millions, now it's provided billions more. If we look back at the per pupil spending number from 1998, we're spending $3 billion more now than we did in 1998. If we had just increased the per pupil amount in 1998 by inflation, we'd be spending $1.5 billion less this year. But the results aren't there. So it might work for institutions to get a lot more money, but it hasn't worked for students. You know, the ACT scores for the 2014 graduating class showed that only 31% of all Kansas kids were college ready in English, reading, math, and science. But that's a little bit of a misleading number. 36% of white students are college ready on all 4 subjects, only 14% of Hispanic students, only 7% of African American students. Now, this isn't something new. This has existed for a long time. The billions that went into the system didn't improve the outcomes that much. So you might say that what the problem we have, and just to kind of sum it up, what we have with the problem with the current formula, it provides, in many cases, too much on the input side and not enough on the output side. You know, we have targeted funding that goes to schools for special education, for at-risk funding, for low-income kids, for bilingual. But the evidence shows that not all that money is being spent. Now, you have to believe that if a school district sees a need, they're going to fulfill it. But every year, over the years, you've seen the ending balances in those targeted funds grow. Now, these funds operate just like your checkbook. There's only one way the balance each year goes higher. If you deposit more than you spend. So if you have cash and you see a need, you got to believe school districts are meeting it. I do. But there's a piece of the formula that's providing more than they need to provide those services. It's not just in those accounts where the cash reserves have built, it's across the board. We've seen $400 million since 2005 that was intended to educate kids went into the bank. It's increased cash reserves across the state. We've seen every legislative post-audit report on school efficiency report that schools are inefficient, that they could do a lot better. And legislative post-audit says most of their recommendations have been ignored. School districts acknowledge that. I sat on the K-12 commission last fall, and we heard one after another say, well, yeah, I mean, they didn't quite put it this way, but if you read between the lines, here's what they said. Yes, we could spend less money. We just don't want to. Now, it was couched in terms of, well, that's local control. Our employees would not want us to do that. We'd rather support the local merchant than to save money. But here's the consequence of every one of those decisions. It diverts money from instruction. This formula is not really educating kids, it's building institutions. That needs to stop. We need a new school funding formula, we think, that is student-focused. Districts have to be held accountable for increasing outcomes. Right now, if they don't increase outcomes, what they do is come back and say, we need more money. That's not the solution. More money obviously hasn't made a difference. Now, a few other things on the block grants. You've probably heard a lot of stories in the media, and if you've heard any of the superintendents talk, the focus is all on this is a cut, this is a cut, and the numbers vary, right? It's a cut. That's government speak for we're not getting as much of an increase as we want. Really? Have you seen any media report? Legislators, have you seen any analysis that compares what they're going to get under the block grant with what they actually received last year? No, because that's part of what you're not supposed to see. Because the block grant is going to set another record spending level. They're going to get exactly what, or very close to what, they were supposed to get this year. And if you put the estimates in from the Department of Education, they never want these pieces to come together. That's part of what we do at Kansas Policy Institute in holding them accountable. We take in their estimate for local, we added federal to the block grant, and there's some things not in the block grant that hasn't really been publicized. Special education is not included in that, and neither is the state aid for bond and interest. When you add all this together, it's $6.147 billion. It's $171 million more than the schools spent last year. Now, you've heard it's all capers, right? And capers doesn't count because we can't. $3 million, 3 out of the 171 is capers. Now, capers counts, the Supreme Court says it counts, but just for the record, it's only a $3 million increase this year. There's a $168 million increase in school funding this year over last year. It's not what you've heard, is it? I didn't think so. If you look at, one of the criticisms is, well, there's not weightings in this. So if we have more at-risk students, well, we're going to have more costs and we should get more money. And there's true that there's no increase, there's no allowance for those weightings to increase, but it goes back to a number of points. First of all, just because you get more money for those weightings doesn't mean you're spending it. At-risk is a great example. If, let's say we'll divide the room right down here in the middle. You two gentlemen, you're the dividing line. If the people on this side of the room were considered at risk and this side wasn't, well then the school district is allowed to say, okay, we can take basically 50% of this class is at-risk students. So we can pay the costs of that class, 50% of those costs, with at-risk dollars. Now you're all sitting in the same classroom. You're all getting the same service. But at-risk money is used to provide this. So it's not really doing anything for those at-risk kids. The district they're following the rules, that's the way it's set up. But just having weightings doesn't mean the money actually goes to the students. It just goes to the institution. Let's see here. We wanted to talk about what goes into a new formula. It's going to take time. There is going to be a bill, it was just announced today. The Senate Education Committee is going to introduce a bill and have a hearing on it Tuesday on something that they've come up with a new formula. And so there's going to be, you're probably going to see claims of, well, this is a bait and switch. We said it's going to take 2 years to study this, and now here comes the new formula all of a sudden. That formula has been in development with a couple of senators and some school districts for some time. We've had some preliminary looks at it. We're going to be going up Tuesday to testify in opposition to it. It's basically not ready for prime time. It is only for 6 school districts, not all 286. They don't know how the numbers work for the other 280 school districts. It's basically designed, a lot of the rationale is backed into to justify giving school districts remarkably every dollar they're getting today. It bakes in all the inefficiencies. It doesn't do anything. There's an incentive if districts do better in outcomes based on what jobs they get, but there's no consequence if districts are not considered successful. So I don't think that formula, you'll hear about it next week. I don't think it's going to go anywhere because a real, truly based school funding formula is going to take a lot of time to put together. There's a lot of variables that have to be looked at, and before anything can be put on paper, any numbers, we have to decide a few very fundamental questions. One of which is, what are we going to fund? Is it going to be whatever schools want to do, or is it going to be what we think the citizens of all across Kansas are responsible for providing? So for example, some districts, you've heard Capers. Capers is a pretty generous retirement program. Some school districts have retirement programs in addition to that. Is that your responsibility to provide an extra retirement plan for the districts that want it? Some districts have, one has its own architect. Does every district need an architect? I mean, there's just, the list goes on and on and on. What are we going to fund? Are we going to require that school districts are organized and operating in a cost-effective manner? Not cutting anything, not cutting a service, But looking at all the things like having 286 payroll systems and 286 accounting systems and 286 purchasing systems, are we going to allow that and let them spend whatever they want, or will this formula somehow, some way require that some of that be combined so that we're getting the best price for that service and make more money available to the classroom? Those are some of the big fundamental questions that the legislature is going to have to deal with before they can start putting any kind of formula together. We have to decide how districts are going to be held accountable for the outcomes. Or are they? Yes or no? That's going to make a big difference in how these formulas get put together. It has to be done out in public. It has to be done over a very long period of time because there are so many complicating factors. Starting with, you have to get to the real numbers. And that's, even those of us who deal in that area, it can be a challenge sometime. You know, I'll give you an example. Just last week, we discovered that there are 5,000 more school employees than the Department of Education lets on. 5,000. Here's how that works. They publish all the information for unified school districts. But there are school districts that are not unified. We found this because we noticed that 600 employees disappeared from the El Dorado School District this year. So where'd they go? I mean, and these were all special education. 451 paras and about 180 special ed teachers. Where did they go? Well, they went from a special ed co-op to a special ed interlocal. If you're in a co-op, then everything is reported on the host district books. If you're in an interlocal, well, that's a separate legal entity. Well, what is that legal entity? Oh, well, it's a school district. Oh, it's a school district. So we started asking, and we got the report, how many employees work for these other school districts? It was like 5,284. Now, imagine if you were a candidate running for office and being told, you know, under your watch, this is what happened to school employment. Well, except for the 5,000 we're not counting. There's an awful lot of things that government just does not want you to know. And that's part of what we do at Kansas Policy Institute. I think I'll just wrap it up there because I want to leave a little bit of time for question and certainly get out before the end of the basketball game. So.
As usual, I'll come around with the microphone. If you've got a question, just catch my eye and I'll get to you.
Yeah, I have two questions. Actually, a comment and a question. You were talking about the federal government not being able to afford and continue to maintain the 100%, the 90%, and so forth. I assume, I'm asking, are you aware of the maintenance of effort requirement within the law that says if the government stops funding completely, that the state that has gone ahead and expanded Medicaid must, like they did with the stimulus not too long ago that gave all the states money for education and then pulled it, and all of a sudden we had to come up with $500 million in Kansas. That same requirement exists with the expansion of Medicaid. And then my comment is, you were talking about special education and money going where it's supposed to go, and you happen to mention El Dorado, my school district. My granddaughter, I'm going in and visiting her class, and the para is teaching the class, and the teacher is working with the special ed student who is a complete vegetable, literally. And to me, that's wrong. The teacher should be teaching the kids who are going to get some benefit from her, and the parents should be helping the other child.
Okay. Yeah, David, you make a very good point on maintenance of efforts. Anytime a government accepts money from the federal government, you have to look for the strings that are attached. And maintenance of effort is almost always there. In fact, we have one of our scholars, Steve Anderson, is working on a paper right now looking at just how much the maintenance of efforts requirements cost state governments. That's one of the big cost drivers. Basically what that says, if you were spending this dollar amount, you need to keep spending that and a little bit more, even if you find it's not necessary. Even if you find that you can provide the service at a better price, the feds don't care. They want you to continue to spend. And so we're doing this research to share with all states across the nation, and hopefully then get that in front of the federal government so that we can start getting some efforts underway in Washington to start severing those maintenance of effort strings. And yeah, that's unfortunate what you described in the El Dorado district. It's part of that problem where we're, I think, symptomatic of that situation where we're hiring a lot more teachers, but our class sizes are growing. Part of that management problem is that we have teachers not teaching. We have teachers working with teachers, and a lot of different things. So that's something that needs to be done. Jennifer, next one. Okay.
Paul, maybe tagging on. But I think along the same lines, but a lot of this cost inflation is at the reading specialists and the paras, and having that done through co-ops and at the district level, should that part of the education process maybe be split out away from the school districts and managed, statewide? Has there been any policy discussion or anything regarding just really separating the needs of those kids and the services provided to those kids in a way that we can really manage it better, be more efficient?
Yeah, Paul, that's a good point. There's, and not just on that special ed piece, but on a lot of different aspects of education. Right now, the money all goes to the institution, and then it decides how to spend the money. Special education is one that's been discussed as possibly something that should be treated separately. The regional service centers, which by the way are school districts, even legislators didn't know that regional service centers are school, that's part of that where some of those employees are, can provide those services more targeted, and when they're working as groups, then they can provide them at better prices as well. But the same thing applies to, let's expand that concept. So instead of having every district with its own accounting and payroll and HR and purchasing, those kinds of things that could be provided maybe through the 7 regional service centers. So it might make more sense to fund them for those functions and then fund the districts for what the districts are providing. There's a lot of different ways this could be done. Some of the services, like accounting and payroll, theoretically could be provided at the state level. So there's a lot of different ways, and those are some of the things we're going to be talking about. Is let's not just go in and figure out how to replicate doing the same thing over and over again. Let's look at all the different possibilities. It's a good point.
Dave, thank you for what you do. I got to tell you, this was a lot easier when I was one of us instead of one of them. Just to clarify one thing, I can't speak for the Senate, but the House did pass the budget out of appropriations. However, it has not passed on the floor. The budget was delivered to us on our desks this morning when we walked in. I believe we're going to work it on the floor Monday or Tuesday. So one thing I would encourage you to do, if you are unhappy with the budget, please feel free to call your legislators and encourage them to try and cut it. That's my question for you. What do you think our chances are trying to get some substantive or even not so substantive cuts to this budget?
The options are almost endless to do that. It's not a question of are there ideas, it's a question of is there political will to implement some of those ideas. Now, if you call your representatives or your senators, you might start with this question: do you think government operates efficiently? If they say yes, you've got a whole nother conversation to have with them. If they say no, your next question is, now what are you going to do about it? Are you going to raise my taxes? Or are you going to do something to reduce the cost of government? That's how you hold people accountable. You don't have to have all the ideas. You just need to get confirmation that we all understand that government costs too much. Some of us want to do something about it and some of us don't. And the way that this process works is for a lot of legislators, because we've taken advantage of it, frankly, that political self-interest, they have to understand which way they tend to get hurt the least. So I'll give you an example. How we got a tax credit scholarship passed for low-income kids last year was a result of helping enough legislators understand, because the pushback always is, well, why do I want to change? I mean, I can see where these kids, their achievements bumping up a little bit. The department says they're making progress. We just did the math for them. If they continue on that same trend on the state assessment, the low-income kids will get to where the other kids are in, about 46 years. Are you satisfied with that? Are you willing to accept that and endorse it? They can't afford to say, you kids wait 46 years, so they have to go a different direction. And that's why that's why you ask those simple, so what are you going to do about it? I didn't send you up there to raise my taxes. If you agree that government's inefficient, what are you going to do about it? I mean, we ask that question all the time, and typically when we do, it's, and John's seen it, well, that's hard, and I don't know, it's not sure. Of course there's not a will, because it's hard, because you all are down here. The special interests with their handout that want to profit from excess spending are up there. And that's the ones who are getting in legislators' faces and making all kinds of comments, let's say, about the consequences of not giving them what they want. So if you do, hold them accountable.
Right here.
Yeah, I was told that public education is about 13,000 per student. I heard private is 10,000 in this area. Is that true? And what about school choice?
Okay. I can't say for sure what private education is, because they're not required to report. Now, you can go out and do some sampling of tuition, and you'll find various degrees. $13,000 a year would get you tuition at some of the best schools, certainly around Kansas. But a lot of private schools spend a lot less. You can find one or two that might cost that, but you can also find some private schools that charge a lot less. And actually, if you look, and I see that most of you have the fact books on your table there, there's some charts in there that compare, there's one in there that compares the performance of low-income kids in public schools with private schools. Now, most private schools in Kansas are religious schools. So, I mean, we don't know that it includes, we know it includes all of the Catholic schools. We don't know if it includes all of the religious schools. But this is all the private schools that took the state assessment. And we're only looking at the low-income kids. So we're looking at apples to apples, and what you see is that the low-income kids in private schools do better than the low-income kids in public schools. Now, part of that is if you're taking the step to get your kid into private school, you're probably going to pay a little bit more attention to what those kids are doing. And there's no question that's part of the factor. But it's interesting that if you want to go back to the school claim where more money is what's needed, well, schools have had a lot more money. In fact, the money for at-risk kids went up 7-fold since 2005. The achievement hasn't really changed much, but the achievement is growing much faster in the private schools that probably didn't have a 7-fold increase in funding over the last 9 years. School choice. Yeah, I think there's not been a lot of talk about school. I mean, there is a bill out there that is looking at some tweaks to the tax credit scholarship bill for low-income kids, and we're hoping to see that expanded this year. There's also been talk of looking at charter schools in Kansas. We're still hopeful that something might come up there. We need to create more opportunities. And it's not about privatizing. Here's another one of the false choices you've probably heard. What this is all really about is you want to privatize the public schools so that some corporations can make profit. That's nonsense. That's a scare tactic that gets trotted out when people don't want to talk about the fact that fourth grade kids, some of them are 3 years behind learning. When they don't want to talk about the fact that only 31% of our kids are considered college ready. It's, oh, you want to change this because you want to privatize it. No, you just want to play a magician trick here and distract us from what the real issues are. Thanks.
Under the new plan, what happens to local option budget? And the second part of my question, is there any provision to prevent a shift from state funding to local funding under the local option budget?
The local option budget stays in place, and so those rules under the block grant would still apply. They haven't changed, so there's no more ability to shift it now than there was in the past. Now, there are school districts, the law that was passed last year allows districts to go as high as 33% of their general fund budget, but to get past 30, they have to have a vote of the public. So there is that possibility to get to 30. If you're not at 33, a lot of districts are, but if you're not there, you can go there. But that would be the extent, and it's not so much a shift because that doesn't reduce what the state does. I mean, it might shift the percentage overall, but it doesn't reduce what the state provides. It just provides local, more on the local side. Okay.
Next question up here.
I'm going to challenge your thinking a little bit.
Good.
If they're doing things the same way we've always done them, we're going to get the same results.
Mm-hmm.
I think clearly it needed a structural change in order to get rid of this bloated, unionized, centralized government monopoly of schools. We need some competition in this. And so how can we further the, I'm going to say private, but whatever, alternative school system? School choice, tax credits, vouchers, whatever. That's what's needed. I've seen it work. If there was a healthy private school system competing with the public schools will get better. They will cost less. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. The states that have opened up school choice to include charter schools, by the way, Kansas has the worst charter school law in the country. The worst. The only way you have a charter school in Kansas is if the local school district says, fine, we'll allow competition. That's the only way. You have to get their approval too. Yeah, so you can imagine the problems that creates. So yes, we need, but I keep coming back to, here's the real reason we need more school choice, because the current system isn't working for thousands of kids. If the current system was working, there wouldn't be as much need for it. I mean, you still have the freedom of choice, and every parent should be, their income shouldn't limit where they can go to school, but if the school systems were doing a better job, if they were responding to these problems instead of trying to sweep them under the rug, there wouldn't be as much need for it. But clearly they are not going to change. I sat, on the testimony provided on the block grant, just to give you an example. I had to sit in the back and listen for 3 hours of testimony from school districts and special interests about why there shouldn't be a block grant, we just need to fund this current formula. 3 hours of testimony, and the only time that students came up was when they were being held hostage. If we don't get what we want, the students are going to suffer. We'll have to cut this program. We'll have to cut that program. I didn't hear one school district say, well, if we don't get what we want, we're going to have to use some of our unspent money. We're going to have to cut back on our extra layers of bureaucracy. We might even have to start operating efficiently. No, they just said, give us what we want or the kids are going to suffer. It was all about the institutions. That's not going to change. And so that's why we definitely need to have real charter schools in Kansas, and we need to have the expansion. I mean, the tax credit scholarship now is only for low-income kids in the 99 worst performing schools in the state, as designated by the Department of Education. We need to get rid of that. Anybody who is in a low-performing school or they are low income should have the opportunity. So that's one of the things you can also, in addition to school choice, you can build this into the formula. You can say, if you're going to put a performance measure on a school funding formula, any district who doesn't meet this criteria, whatever this is, where you set it, then everybody in that district is free to go somewhere else and have their funding follow them. Or you can say that district loses its accreditation. There's a number of things. You need to incentivize the school district to change. They don't want to change. They'll tell you they've changed. They haven't changed.
Next question right here.
Today was supposed to be a vote on repealing Common Core, and what is your take on, because it's a very expensive proposition for the school districts to implement that, what's your stand on, or what do you think can be done about Common Core and coming up with standards that will actually be realistic and something that would be attainable by kids if we repeal it and get something in that would be effective?
You know, that's several questions in there. I'll try to answer them all, maybe not in the same order. First of all, our position on Common Core, it never should have been there in the first place. The problem is it's been there for so long that it's going to be very difficult to root it out. One of the keys to doing that is having more and more states say no thank you to it, whether it's phased out or however they go about it. Now, that process is going to be hard. It's further complicated by the fact that we just got rid of the school funding formula. So there's the political will. You know, I had this enormous fight over school funding that's going to continue. How much more time do I want to devote in political capital to trying to get rid of Common Core? So there's that factor out there. The Department of Education is diametrically opposed to getting out of Common Core. So they're going to fight it with everything they have, as is the State Board of Education. But the simple fact is that the more that parents understand it, the less they like it. And the same applies for a lot of teachers, frankly. Where that's going to go. Now, the other question is, what will we put in its place? Our suggestion is what you had in place before No Child Left Behind. I mean, we have national standards. It's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Students have been assessed so you can compare performance across all states. Kansas had very strong performance and academic standards prior to No Child Left Behind. And the academic standards are what you're supposed to learn. The performance standards are like the report card. How well did you do? And it's the curve. So like 90 to 100 is an A and so forth. In Kansas, the performance standards were dropped down to something along the lines of 70 to 100 is an A. We need to go back. I mean, think about this. In 2001, Kansas reported, like 38% proficiency on the state assessment. In 2002, it was over 60% because they changed the standards. They lowered the curve. If we just go back to what we already had and be honest about the performance that we were getting, kids were doing fine then. I mean, a lot of us in this room got pretty good public educations, probably, in Kansas and other states. We didn't have to have the federal government or any other outside interest dictating what's going to be taking place in every classroom. That needs to go away. It's going to be complicated, I think, because it's been there for a long time, and trying to unwind that. But it needs to happen one way or another.
Dave Trabert, let's give him a big hand.